talk about, what's happening with the US and Chinese relationship and trade this year and in coming years, given that it's been, very tense and contentious in the last few years. So I wanted to share, let me get where I can show this, topics that we're going to talk about, and then I'll be handing the baton over to Mary. Topics we're going to talk about: government and politics, COVID and the economy, China's new 5-year plan, which I geek out about probably more than many of you, and then what does that mean for what the future holds. So we're going to jump in here with government and politics. What's happening with Biden and Xi, right? Biden obviously just became president and serves for 4 years. Xi took over his role a couple of years ago and officially leads through 2023. They're on 5-year terms. So he leads through 2023. He could lead another 5-year term. That's possible, but it's not necessarily a given. So with this reset in relationship with the new US president and an existing Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, what do we think is going to happen with that? I know where this kind of leads me into trade agreements and tariffs. People have been asking me, I had a lot of questions and work the first couple months of this year. The tariffs have not been removed. Some of the exclusions expired. What's happening with tariffs in 2021? And this is my personal opinion, okay? So my personal opinion is politically, Biden is not going to remove the tariffs with China for at least 6 months into this year. I think he has other things on his plate that he's more focused on. I don't think he wants to do anything that could be considered politically or economically contentious so that early. Maybe they're building a case for why the tariffs have actually been damaging to the US economy and to the labor force before he reverses the tariffs or reduces them or some other fashion. But I think they're in the near term, in the next 6 months, we're going to be living with the tariffs as they are. So that's not the news everybody wants to hear. And then 6 months from now, we'd have to recalibrate and see where things are going, moving forward. Currency fluctuations. I've shared a slide here from Asia Time Financial. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, I posted this a week or two ago. The US dollar yuan has changed about 7%. So it was early last year in 2019, it was hovering over 7 yuan to 1 US dollar, and even 7.3 and 7.4 sometimes. And it's actually now a little bit below 6.5. So quite a significant change. The larger the yuan dollar, so if it's 7.5 yuan to $1, that helps Chinese exporters. It benefits Chinese exporters because it makes their goods less expensive. When it drops to 6.5, it makes their goods in the US more expensive because they may have to raise their price. They're not getting as much money. So basically it disincentivizes exports for many Chinese companies, and it raises prices. They raise prices on the US side. So it means oftentimes you're paying for more. This group believes that is going to continue, that the US dollar is going to continue to weaken, the RMB is going to continue to strengthen, maybe even to 6 yuan per dollar, which in my 30 years of doing this, 35 years of doing this, it's very seldom been at 6 or below 6. So I don't know that we're going to get there. But currency hedging is going to be a big topic if it hasn't been for your company. How you write your contracts in US dollars or RMB, if you have a band in your contract, buy-sell contract that says, that if the currency fluctuates more than X%, who absorbs that cost? Those are all things companies should be considering. I was on a call this morning with the client that sold their Chinese business to a buyer in China for over $16 million. And that original sale agreement happened in September of last year. And we wrote into the contract where the exchange rate would be pegged at, so that the U.S. was not eating any of the fluctuation. Now, obviously, it can go both ways, right? It can fluctuate up and down, and it could work to your benefit or against you, depending on whether you're buying or selling. So, but it's just something that I would recommend that if you're not paying attention to, you pay attention to that. COVID and the economy in general, in the US, I think we've all seen that they've passed or are going to pass, went back to the House, and another stimulus payments that are coming out, benefits to small businesses and individuals and companies, and unemployment. Unemployment in the US is still high. It's hitting some sectors more than others. There are some people chirping about inflation coming, but we haven't seen that per se. In China, they also had a lot of stimulus. They handled their stimulus in a different way than we do, but they put a lot of liquidity into the country. They have actually recovered economically already, and in a good way. Their growth may even be as high as 8% recently. It certainly ended up more over 6% in 2020 because of their intense lockdown at the beginning of the COVID virus, and they were able to keep it from spreading throughout the country. So they were able to go back to business and work by June, July, August of last year, and still are. And so most people in China today are living a very normal life. They're traveling. One of my friends messaged me this morning. She lives in Xiamen, which is on the southeast coast of China, and she pulled her daughter out of kindergarten to travel because everything's so cheap right now. Traveling because it hasn't rebounded totally. And so she and her daughter in Guizhou, which is a beautiful mountain region in south central China. So they're having a good time, and we're not yet, sadly enough. So unemployment is high. It's always difficult to get exact figures in China. They have the same baby boom bubble that we have of people that have not retired, that they thought would retire, that are still in the workforce, and a younger generation that's been very slow to get into the workplace in many ways, the way our 20-something generation has had a slowdown in their getting into the workplace. So they're dealing with a lot of the same issues that we are, not because of COVID per se, as much as population and age of population and mismatch between skill set and jobs available, and geography of jobs available and where people are, and those kind of things. They have not had a lot of inflation. That's not been an issue. I had a conversation with the client yesterday. What kind of raises should they be looking at giving their staff this year? In some years where China's economy is growing in double digits, the raises, stay along with that. This, like I said, last year was on average about 6%, maybe 8% in the last few months. So I think raises that are about 5% was what I recommended to them. The two graphics that I have here, the first one is the US projected growth in GDP, and the bottom one is China's projected growth in GDP. So we're going to talk about the 5-year plan. And one of the things the 5-year plan typically sets out in China is what their target growth rate is. So they're talking about 5 to 6% a year target growth rate. So right now they're at roughly 100 trillion RMB, which is 15 trillion US dollars. And these are rough numbers, depending on exchange rates. But they're expected by 2036 is the end of this graph, or 2035. So in less than 15 years to basically double that and go from 15 trillion US dollars to 30 trillion US dollars. And our growth is expected to be slower than that over the next few years. So they're at 15 trillion right now. We're at 20 trillion right now, but at some point, and this number has been this year has been bandied about for more than 10 years now, whether China would have a larger economy, GDP, than the United States. Some people were looking at 2020, 2025, 2020, 2030, but COVID has only accelerated that because it caused our economy to slow down longer than the effect on China's economy. So China's economy, we anticipate it's encouraged how quickly China's economy will probably overtake the United States. So what is the five-year plan system? It started in 1953, so not right along when the country was founded, but not long after. And the first five-year plan was focused on industrialization, taking China from an agriculture-based system to more of an industrialized country. So the 2021 is actually the 14th five-year plan. It sets nationwide targets for government investment. Often it relaxes lending to certain pockets of industry where the government wants to see growth. It focuses on infrastructure development. So it's really a good roadmap for where's China going. And then based on that, how could we as companies in the United States, how could we find opportunities in that development and growth? So this New Year five-year plan, which has been issued for almost a year now in kind of a draft form, and they were meeting last week, and I don't think they've yet issued the final version of it out there. There's some preliminary versions, but so what are some of the key parts of this five-year plan? Increased internationalization of the RMB, and they've gone about it in a web type of way, in that they've made the renminbi more of a currency for trading with some of their partners in the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and the Middle East and Southeast Asia and South America. So they're starting in some of these countries with what you might consider softer currencies to make the RMB more of a transferable currency in those countries, rather than necessarily trying to push it to be a benchmark currency like the US dollar or the euro is. They had created years ago, there's the CNY, which is the actual abbreviation for the Chinese yuan. They created the CNH, which is a more convertible version of it that's funded in Hong Kong. And that's what a lot of the RMB hedge, the yuan hedge companies use, is the CNH. So those are some terms you could look up later if you're as geeked out as I am on these topics. The second thing they're looking at, increased domestic demand. One of the key phrases that repeats itself in this five-year plan is dual circulation. And I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around what dual circulation as a term has to do with how they're defining it, but I think it's not being translated all that well. But what they mean is more domestic demand. So, you know, domestic sales, domestic demand. Maybe that's what they mean is dual, rather than export focused. And they've been going down this path now for a while, but they're raising it as a higher level goal in the 2021 five-year plan. So they always make a list of what kind of technologies they want to focus on. So in general, they're focusing on increasing manufacturing technology, increasing innovation, and then reducing emissions. So climate compliance with climate goals. So those are three like overriding focuses. Within the key technologies, the high-tech AI, I had calls early last year and the year before, 2019, from people saying, do you have any AI experts in your network in China, in the US, that could come speak on the topic in China? And, you know, circuits and chips are a huge problem right now. I have other clients that are having problems getting chips for, you know, the products that they manufacture here in the US, and the supply is down. There's not enough manufacturing, there's not enough inventory. Taiwan Semiconductor is one of the top 3 or 5 companies in the world, depending on what list you're looking at. They're building a plant in Phoenix in right now, 2021, 2022. They're probably looking to open it late 2022, 2023. So, you know, the US, Biden also recently issued a goal statement of putting government money behind developing chip knowledge and capacity in the United States. So the US and a lot of countries, even before COVID, with trade, you know, wars and barriers, but because of COVID and the lack of ability to travel and the disruption in the supply chain, a lot of governments and companies have had, you know, a more abrupt wake-up call to, we need to have regional resources if we can't rely on far-reaching internationalized supply chains. So, so it's happening in China, where they're focusing on building up capabilities where they're dependent on raw materials from the United States or components from the United States. And the US is trying to build up capabilities on things where we're dependent from raw materials or components in China and other countries. So that's a big issue. Life and health sciences. There's been a lot of issues with Chinese meat supply and the swine flu a couple years ago. I have clients in that business, so I have had a lot of involvement in that issue. So that's been a big problem. How do they improve their distribution within the country? How can they improve safety and biosecurity on that type of thing? And then human health issues. They've got, as I said, an aging population. How are they going to care for the elderly in the aging population? Fewer children live with their parents or have their parents live with them today than 20 years ago, or especially 50 years ago. So that's, creating a lot of issues, and with issues, there are opportunities. Nursing homes and elder care and all of that are huge opportunities. Aerospace is something China's been very invested in for more than 5 years now. And they're going to continue to be. They have a explorer on the moon. Was it on the moon or Mars? I'm not sure. But in the last year, and that was huge for them. So these are all like high level target goals of industries that they're interested in. So as I said, elder care, mental health is something that is not well developed and socially acceptable in China. It's not in the US and many Western European countries, although we've been on the path to that for longer than they have. And so they're trying to work on that also. Health system hospital management is a major issue in China. There's huge discrepancies between government hospitals and private hospitals and the care that's provided, what your government health insurance gets you. There's a lot of issues with that. They want to have increased self-reliance on key resources. China has always been a resource-poor country other than humans and certain types of minerals and metals, but they don't have energy resources to the level they need them other than poor quality coal, and even that. They don't have food resources the way they need food to feed their country. They've been a net importer of food for decades. So there's a lot of key resource issues that they're going to have to deal with. So what does the future hold for trade and investment between China and the United States? As I said, healthcare issues, elder care, telemedicine is something that could be growing. Oddly enough, China has one of the most web-based, internet-friendly, mobile countries in the world, in large part because when they were developing the resources for people to actually, start having phone calls and television, we were as a world already at the point where we were developing web and internet-based technologies. So they skipped over the whole landline, having a landline, having, dial-up internet. They just skipped that and they went straight to the new stuff, right? So everybody lives on their cell phones in China. They do everything on their cell phones. And WeChat e-commerce is huge in China. It's just huge. It dwarfs the United States e-commerce. And so a lot of US companies come to me with questions on selling in China's e-commerce system. So I think partnering with that, services on, online services and telemedicine or platforms for that, or partnering with Chinese companies to develop those systems. There's a lot of opportunity with that. Some of the other changes that have been happening and are being highlighted with this 5-year plan, finance and accounting and foreign services in general are going to be more accessible in China. They're going to be allowed. So as I spent my 20s in manufacturing and supply chain, but I'm also a CPA. And one of the things that is expected to come out of this plan is that foreign CPAs could practice in China. So they've I don't know about lawyers, foreign lawyers, but they've talked about CPAs and accounting and finance services. They've allowed private and foreign banks in limited ways. But again, with this new 5-year plan, that's expected to increase. So investment services, banking services, very interesting. Lending would be very interesting in China. Retail, again, if you're promoting your country to be more domestic consumption based, then retail, food, beverages, those are huge opportunities. And I was reading one of these slides earlier. One of the graphics came from the British Chinese uh, Council, and they were saying that the UK's exports to China have actually grown in the last 6 months because of, Chinese doing more shopping, buying more imported food. So there's a lot of good opportunities for this. And then not just these high-tech new sectors, but also improving old tech sectors. So China has a lot of manufacturing. They've been called the world's manufacturer. So helping those factories to become more automated, to have better lean systems, to run more efficiently, to have better automated systems that show when the CNC machine isn't operating effectively and when it can be optimized. So there's a lot of tech opportunities for converting older type of manufacturing into something that's more modern and efficient and productive. So there's a lot of equipment sales opportunities in China because of that, as well as software sales and consulting opportunities. So those are things that I expect to be increasing quite a bit. You want to hold questions till the end, Chris, or?
No, we can do them now. It probably makes most sense to
Okay.
do that.
Does anyone have any questions at this point?
I'll just remind people, if you want to pose a question, you can do so in the chat or in the Q&A box, or if you want to do it in person live, I can enable you to be able to speak. Just so you have a question.
Let me
In the
pull up the
meantime, maybe
chat.
also get the ball rolling and ask Kim, what's going on with the Belt and Road Initiative for China to try and improve their access to markets around the world?
Yeah, it's still expanding. It's really dropped out of the news a lot in the last 24 months. It doesn't necessarily mean they've changed their focus on it, their growth of it, but it's definitely not been promoted in the way that it had been promoted before then. One of the things I like to say about the Belt Road Initiative is that it really came out of the 2008 recession, when the US and Europe went through, the finance, banking, mortgage crash in '08. It was really a wake-up call for China of their feeling that they were too dependent on us and in Europe and other developed markets who they felt were unstable, like not as strictly regulated as their markets are. So I think that that's part of where they said we need to develop other customers, right? Which any good sales manager in a company would do the same thing, or supply chain manager. We need to develop other customers and suppliers. But to do that, they recognized they had to help develop infrastructure in a lot of those other countries so that they could be better trading, both ports and trains and airports and all that kind of thing, but also more sophisticated infrastructure within the country to allow for those countries to grow and develop. So that was a long-term play on China's part. And it's still in effect. It has been very beneficial to a lot of the countries, especially South America and Africa, and then through the stands into Turkey and north in that region. There's been a lot of development and trade that's been going that way. So I think it will continue. It's just that they're not promoting it or talking about it. The PR has died down. Any other questions? And as I said, you can connect me. My name's at the bottom here, my email address on LinkedIn. Send me messages if you have any other questions. I just posted about China's hukou system, which is their citizenship within the country. I always say China is more like Europe than the United States. Each province and region is in many ways like a different country, and they have their own regulations, and you can't just easily move from one to the other. So their hukou system for residents, if they are going to make changes to that, that will have a tremendous impact on the average Chinese person's life in China. So I'll be excited to hear if that comes out. So, but thank you very much. If there's no other questions, Chris, I will relinquish my power.
I was going to say I'll put a few more questions that you
Sure.
folks might be thinking of that could be relevant. Is you just mentioned the provinces, and obviously there's been issues with what's happening to the Uyghurs, and as a result, the U.S. put restrictions on goods that are coming from the province of Xinjiang. Is that having any impact on importers in the United States? Are they having problems, not necessarily because of that province, but is there an additional burden for them to certify that products they are importing don't come from that
I
province?
haven't seen that, but Xinjiang, I was in Xinjiang a few years ago, and Xinjiang is not it has very, very little manufacturing. They have oil and gas and some coal reserves, but it's really a very arid desert environment. And it's so far, it's basically like saying Alaska to continental United States. So it's so far away from the rest of the country that transportation makes any kind of manufacturing base there difficult. So I think that is definitely an issue. I'm going to stop sharing just so you can see me instead of the screen. But so that's what makes it difficult. One thing I would say on the topic is there's a perspective difference on the Chinese side to the U.S. side. I think many times in the U.S. I've read about this being religious, religious persecution. To the Chinese, it's not a in my opinion, it's not religious as much as it is ethnic. They're a different ethnicity. They're not Han Chinese, and I think to a lot of the average Chinese citizens and government, that's where the challenge comes in. Is that the Uyghurs have a different ethnicity, a different culture, and if they don't adapt to the Han culture and the Han Chinese way, and China's been doing this since the 1950s. They've been sending ethnic Han Chinese out to these farther regions where there are different ethnic groups and kind of encouraging them to intermarry or to adjust the population to have more Han Chinese representation. So that's problematic right there, right? From our American perspective, that's problematic. But so they see it as more of a culture ethnicity issue than a religious issue. And then secondly, there were terrorist bombings in China in major cities, in train stations in major cities 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago that were carried out by some of these Uyghur separative groups. And so again, in the Chinese thinking, this is like the Irish Republican Army. This is a breakaway group that's part of our country that's using violence to try to push their agenda. So I'm not defending it. My goal is more to explain different perspectives, right? How someone else has a different perspective. So it's very interesting isn't the right word because there are people involved in this and it's affected a lot of humans and their lives and it's a difficult situation. But from a business standpoint, I haven't seen it affect individual companies trading back and forth in many ways.
Thanks, Kim. I think you've highlighted something that's always important for people in businesses to be able to see things from the perspective of others to understand where they're coming from. That's what is going to make you successful in no matter what market you want to enter into. I have a question here from V that came to me. And she was asking whether there are any import limitations on products due to COVID that come from China.
The COVID limitations would be on the PPE. So there was a lot of crazy people jumping in, US and Chinese, trying to supply PPE. And I feel like between March and June, all I did was tell people, don't get into the PPE business if you weren't there already, please. So there are still some not only restrictions, but increased scrutiny on any materials that are going back and forth for, manufacturing or final goods for PPE. But other than that, I don't think that there's been any direct COVID change in equipment. The next speaker is going to talk about freight and shipping and trade and disruptions. Certainly, the disruptions of first China shutting down, and then as they were starting back up, the US shutting down, and then, it's just that's bled into the end of 2020. And I've seen a lot of companies, hopefully, take this as an opportunity to look at their organizations and streamline or improve their operations. Because that's, it's a great time to see where your weaknesses are and take advantage of that to improve yourselves. So I think that's happened. Not all companies are back to speed I would say in the US more than in China. Most Chinese companies are back up and operating. There are still some inter-China restrictions on traveling when a outbreak occurs in one city. You may have to quarantine when you get there, and there are still quarantines when you go into China. The only foreigners allowed into China right now are those with residence permits. And someone shared a notice a few days ago that even with a residence permit, China made a list of 14 countries where people with residence permits could not come in, and the US was on that list. US, Bangladesh, France, UK. In theory, because of our vaccination rates, is how that list was drawn up, according to the government. I don't know I've only seen that reported in one news source. So I don't know that that's actually true. But I have a client who wants to send their executive back, who's a resident at their plant in China. So he's supposed to be going back in the next couple weeks. So if I know that he can get in, I'll update that on LinkedIn. But so yeah, travel is still heavily impacted, obviously. And that impacts people's ability to do business and form new investments and make new relationships. So definitely that has an ongoing impact. But as far as a product-based impact, I would say only PPE.
Okay, that's interesting you mentioned that. I see a comment from Tim Armandinger, who's a good friend of ours, and he said you have reassured him that he made the right choice when he declined to try and import PPEs from China in spite of the demand for them.
Hi, Tim. Yeah, you're a smart guy. I've met Tim. Yeah, it's amazing to me the people that jumped on it, and to me it was an opportunity to risk your reputation, because you can't, even with the team in China, it would be very hard to qualify that the factory was legitimately. I had ways to do it, if somebody was down that. What I suggested was go back to US, China, and again, this is a Mary thing, go back to see if that company had been exporting PPE to the US 3 years ago. If there are trade records that they were shipping PPE to the US 3 or 4 years ago, okay, they're legitimately in that business and they've had those sort of regulatory certifications. If they can't prove that to you, then even then you're risking that they're not subcontracting the manufacturing to another company, or I stayed completely out of it. So I think that's the best.
Okay. All right, hope that the computer froze. I'm hoping that was at my end and not yours. But it seemed no more questions. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your insights. today. That was really interesting to learn not only what's going on in China, what opportunities there may be to import, but also to export to China from the U.S., particularly in some of our service sectors like healthcare. And now I am pleased to introduce Mary Robbins. She's the sales manager for jfmoran, which is a family, woman-owned logistics company that's been in operation for over 80 years. She has over 20 years of experience in the logistics industry, starting with JAXPort. In addition, she has experience in the industry that includes warehouse management, customs brokerage, freight forwarding, contract negotiations, and dispatching. Mary is also a member, along with myself, of the Central North Florida District Export Council, and it is her passion for logistics coupled with her operational background in the industry that's been instrumental in her clients' success with jfmoran. So thanks very much, Mary. And I got to remember to make you a presenter so you can change your mind.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Chris. And Kim, that was a very informative presentation. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing it?
Yeah, you need to click on the from beginning to get it on full screen. There we go.
Okay. Let me change the setting there. Okay.
We see your notes now, Mary.
Okay. Let me change the monitor. Now we're good?
Yep.
Okay. I have more than 8 years experience shipping from China, and my presentation will include the following topics: Incoterms, the impact of COVID, the effects of tariffs, supply chain disruption, shipping cost, and future trade. I know we're running short on time, so I'll kind of try to speed this up a little bit. A customs broker manages the imports, shipments. They file the ISF, which is an import security filing that's required prior to the vessel departure, submit customs entries, issue bonds. Bonds are for U.S. Customs surety that the tax and duty payments will be made. A freight forwarder manages export shipments, such as filing AES, which is the automated export system, make bookings, and generate bills of lading. A third-party logistics provider manages shipping, warehousing, and trucking. Failure to plan and research may result in greater cost. I often receive calls from people who have imported and they've been advised by customs that they need a broker. Most frequently is the purchase of a private vehicle on eBay. It's at JAXPort. Come to find out, it's not EPA or DOT compliant. It is now seized by customs. The importer now has the decision to either destroy the vehicle or ship it back to origin. Tariffs determine the tax and duty amount on import shipments. A Schedule B is the HTS code for exports. Keep in mind, there are reciprocal tariffs on Chinese products that may affect the sale of your product. Also, Section 301 tariffs. They could be an additional 10 to 25% on your duty, and that's based on your commercial invoice value. Clients have asked about shipping to Canada from China and then importing into the US. That does not exclude the tariffs. The country of origin will remain as China, and that is what is based on. Also determine if there's any partner government agencies that require approval, such as the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Also, products sold in the U.S. below fair market value may be subject to ADD tariffs. These tariffs can exceed 200%. Some of the items are aluminum, solar panels, tires, and some bedroom furniture. I had a client in Tampa that container got inspected. Customs was questioning one of the products that appeared to be a nightstand and chest of drawers. The client insisted it was an end table and armoire. Well, unfortunately, the fines and penalties that were incurred exceeded what the ADD tariff value would have been. Incoterms are very important. These are international regulations that define who is paying freight, insurance, tax, and duty. Be certain these terms are defined on your invoice or contract. How do you determine the best shipping method? For ocean shipments, LCL is for shipments that do not occupy a full container, and pricing is based on the space occupied. These items are shipped loose, floor loaded, with hundreds of other cartons and crates. I had a client whose cargo was often on a Mark's hold. When the wooden crates came out of the container, it was not identifiable. I contacted the shipper and I said, just put an X on the crates, just so we know it's this client's shipment. And those markings are also indicated on the bill of lading. A full container, mainly in 20-foot or 40-foot sizes, they ship for a flat fee. I recommend those container shipments for high value and fragile items, as they direct to deliver to the final destination. And then air. It's the most expensive, it's the fastest. Allow a minimum of 3 days for air shipments due to security screenings and customs inspections at most of the airport terminals. The initial stages of COVID did result in factory shutdowns. There was a major decline in shipping. Shipments arriving to the U.S. required third-party warehousing, as many businesses were closed. There was a quick turnaround as the demand for consumer goods increased, such as toilet paper and PPE. Currently, we're seeing vessel delays due to quarantine. It disrupts the ports of call. For example, if a vessel is delayed calling the Port of New York, it affects the other port to call along the East Coast for Charleston and Jacksport. Shipping costs on average have tripled in the last year. In fact, prior to the Lunar New Year, shipping costs exceeded $10,000 for a 40-foot container. There's major congestion issues at every seaport. Cargo shipped prior to the Lunar New Year are now hitting the U.S. ports. In comparison, the strike in 2015, the LA port shut down for 3 days. 28 vessels were anchored, waiting to discharge. Currently, there's 62 vessels anchored in the bay, waiting to discharge in LA. I had a new client importing his first shipment. It was delayed 3 weeks before discharging in the LA port. This tied up his capital. The buyer even threatened to cancel the order. Expect delays with every move in the supply chain. At the seaports, the terminals are short on chassis, containers are grounded, the warehouses are backed up due to lack of space, and truckers are backlogged as much as 5 business days. In fact, it was reported in New York, truck drivers are backlogged up to 10 days. We're seeing new charges as a result of these increased shipping costs. A container balance fee is an origin fee. Port congestion here at destination, these fees can add up to $250. I just got notified of another new fee at origin, an environmental impact fee. I can't even explain that one at this time. There's many contributing factors for disruption. Vessels are loaded at capacity. Congestion is not just at the seaports, it's at the inland ports as well, such as the rail yards, especially Chicago, St. Louis, and Atlanta. There's equipment shortages. 80% of the shipping containers are manufactured in China. The increased costs for steel and lumber have also resulted in the lack of production and are driving up the rates. There's not enough truck drivers. Containers are incurring storage and other fees, some up to $300 a day. We all know about the weather, the Texas blackout. Just this past weekend, there was a LA train derailment. There's a Montana mudslide. Containers are overboard, occurring much more frequently. 2 words, cargo insurance, highly recommended for all risk. U.S. exporters and manufacturers can use the services of a freight forwarder to manage booking and documentation such as the bill lading. Please note the Incoterms on your invoice. Your buyer in China should obtain a customs broker to determine what's required for importing your product. Is a certificate of origin needed? Does the commercial invoice need to be translated to Chinese? Is a bill lading required? Does it have to be an original, or can we do an express release? The good news is shipping rates are much lower. In fact, shipping lines are exporting empty containers back to China because they can make more money on the import back to the US. For the next 5 years, I expect the United States and China will remain top trading partners and competitors. The Chinese government continues to invest in the ports and infrastructure to promote trade. In fact, I have seen on some commercial invoices that the sellers in China are offering discounts to the US buyers. We are certainly in a supply chain crisis. All indications is this crisis will continue through 2022 with no relief expected. There is an article in the New York Times that captures our current unprecedented situation. I've never seen anything like this. Chaos strikes global shipping. In conclusion, my top 5 recommendations. Due diligence. Consult a logistics provider. Determine your Incoterms and make sure they're indicated on your commercial invoice. Consider all costs and factor these costs into your purchase price. Book early, at least 3 to 4 weeks before the CRD, cargo ready date. I know there's a lot of acronyms in this industry. I try to make sure I explain them all to you. And expect delays and plan accordingly. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's been some really great information, and you've got great advice for companies there. It's really important, as you've said and illustrated, to think about all these things before you enter into contracts. You don't want to find out after you've already determined the price that you actually have to pay more for shipping than you expected, that you didn't plan for working with a customs broker at the other end of the transaction. And it's important for companies where these roles are separate, that your salespeople are aware of these things as well, so that they don't commit the company to a contract that doesn't take into account all these other factors. So it's
Right.
really a company-wide collaboration that needs to take place. I'll also mention, since we're talking about ports, while we're waiting for questions, I see one question asking whether we'll get copies of the presentations, and yes, we'll send you copies of those. Now I'd forgotten what I was going to ask you about. Oh, I know, I was going to mention, we have some really great ports here in the state of Florida with access to China. Obviously, Mary is in Jacksonville and works with JAXPort. And we're also fortunate to have joining us today Christina Dougie with Port Tampa Bay, which has some great new connections right nearby to us here in Central Florida. I like your dog there, Mary.
Oh, I'm still sharing the screen?
That's okay. Yeah. Not a problem. I will just change that. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's Kellyanne.
That'll always be fun. But they've got some great connections there as well. So as well as obviously the Port of Miami. So We have a lot of great connections for companies that are looking to export to or import from China. Just while we wait to see if anyone has any questions, I was going to ask, what happens if you're shipping in a less than container load and another part of the shipment, like there's something else in there that needs to be inspected, potentially for security, on security grounds? Does that slow down the entire container and you're going to get stuck even though you're not the problem? Or will the Customs and Border Protection take apart that container load and only delay the part of the load that needs to be inspected?
Well, if customs requires an intensive exam, it will be for the full container because it would have to be drayed to a CES, container exam station.
What's a CES container station?
Container exam site.
Okay.
They have to register with customs to be able to form these exams.
Okay.
So yes, it will delay the entire shipment.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the dangers if you're not sending your own full container, is that something completely unrelated to your shipment could result in delays. And as you were saying previously, you really need to give yourself some wiggle room in contracts to take into account for these things.
And it will also result in additional cost. I've seen full container inspections result in $1,200.
These delays can also be important, I think, when it comes to payment, because this goes back to knowing what the Incoterms are and where you're going to assume control of the, or going to assume the risk for the product. It also, you have to really know when you're going to be expected to pay for the product. If it's, once it's on the ship, once it gets into on the dockside here, there could be all sorts of different things that will affect where you might not have received the goods, but you're still having to pay for them, or conversely, where you've shipped the goods and are not going to get paid until after everything's been released. All right. Seeing no additional questions, thank you so much, Mary. This
Thank you,
has been
Chris.
really great for our Central Florida exporters to learn about how they can actually send products to China or bring them in from China. It's always a bit of a challenge that people, until they've got some experience importing and exporting, are not necessarily aware of all these little details. And that's something that the Central Florida International Trade Office can help you with, is to connect you to the resources like Mary that can help you, as well as I see we have our friends Janet Ginerine and John Paul McFarland from Enterprise Florida, which are one of the real treasures of the Florida exporting community, because they have so many grants and programs, as well as providing excellent data on international trade between our great state and the rest of the world. So you may not always appreciate what you have until you're somewhere else, but I certainly know that other companies are envious of the programs that are offered by Enterprise Florida. So I thank Janet and John Paul for joining us today. And now it is my turn to pass the discussion over to Carol Palacio, who is with Orange County's Office of Economic Trade and Tourism Development, to talk about some of the county's upcoming activities related to its relationship with our sister city in China. And just give me a moment to bring up the video. You can start talking while I bring it up.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for hosting this informative webinar today. To the community, we are very supportive of the Central Florida International Trade Office, so thank you for all the information provided by Mary and Kim. So I just wanted to briefly talk about, our sister city initiatives that we're doing here in the county. Taizo is one of 5 sister cities, and we are engaging in some cultural exchanges and business exchanges. So this video that you see here is from our friends in Taizo. A little bit about them. They are on the south coast of China. It's one of China's most predominant areas in natural conditions with distinct seasons. They have a population of over 6 million with a booming private economy and industries focused on auto assembly and manufacturing, aviation, pharmaceuticals, plastic and molds, smart toilets, sewing machines, pumps, and electric motors. The sister city relationship between Orange County and Taizhou was established in 2013, and we've maintained great relationships with them, and they welcome Orange County to come and visit. So with that said, I'd like to present the video from our friends in Taizhou, China. And Chris, I think there's an issue with the volume.
Okay, I'm not sure how to. Does that make any difference?
No, but I think we can just be creative and just maybe watch the visuals here. So maybe I'll just do some narrate. I'll narrate while the video is going. So as you can see, some of the industry clusters that they have represented in manufacturing. These are potential opportunities between local companies here and companies in Taizhou that we can do some exports with and imports. We have our partners at Enterprise Florida to assist with that, the U.S. Commercial Service. If you're an American company trying to find new markets into China or different regions. They have a large tourism sector as well, and this relationship was established during Mayor Jacobs's time here with the county. They also have a large industry in tourism, outdoors and recreation. During COVID, they sent us a video saying stay strong, and they showcased some of their local schools and children sending that message. And we also sent them a video of Orlando and our industry sectors here, and they were really impressed with what we had to offer. They're looking forward to exchanges between both regions.
Interesting to see how they were voted the happiest place in China, and we have the happiest place on Earth here in Central Florida.
That's correct. Some of our other sister cities include the North Brabant region in the Netherlands, Quindío and Medellin in Colombia, Mendoza in Argentina.
Now they're all saying Taizhou.
Our apologies about the volume, not sure what happened there, but we're happy to share the video if anyone is interested in hearing the music and background.
Do you want me to bring up the...
Yes, please. And also, in addition to business exchanges, we're working on doing some cultural exchanges, and our friends with the Asian American committee here in Orange County, they're pursuing some cultural events, and spearheading that is Dr. Lin from the county and my colleague Shally Wong here at the mayor's office. You can contact them should you have any questions about the upcoming events, but they wanted me to share this information, and they're celebrating on May 21st, at 7 p.m. They'll feature many local Asian American performing groups with our sister city, Taizo. They'll also be presenting 2 awards in the event, a Distinguished Asian American Award and Outstanding Community Service Award. You can follow them at facebook.com/OCACFL. And again, we have our friends with the Asian Chamber of Commerce, and you can contact again Shally Wong or Dr. Lin for more information. Thank you, Chris, for this platform to share some information on what we're doing with our sister cities.
Well, thank you to Carol and to Orange County for being so supportive of international trade and for being such a strong supporter of the Central Florida International Trade Office. I'll give anybody any last chances at a question, and let's see. Somebody has asked how to spell the sister city. It's Taizo, and I have included that in the chat box. Well, if there are no further questions, again, I will thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the Asian American Chamber and VMA for helping organize this event and co-hosting it. Thank you to our 2 speakers, Kim Kirkendall and Mary Robbins, for sharing their insights on trade with China. And finally, thank you to Carol for sharing some information about our sister city in China. I think that's probably something a lot of people didn't know about before we had this meeting today. And it is great to see some of the activities that are being planned, both cultural as well as business with China. Thank you, everybody. And that concludes today's webinar. As mentioned, I will share copies of the presentations with everyone afterwards, as well as contact information for our speakers today. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.